Marguerite Marie Albert was born the eldest daughter of poor Parisian parents. Her father was a coachman, and her mother a housekeeper in the homes of some nobles. Because of her parents' work, Marguerite developed an understanding of the lives of the Parisian aristocracy. She grew up fascinated by the opulent atmosphere of the upper classes, and her ambitions extended far beyond simply being a servant like her mother. She longed to be part of that class, armed with her captivating beauty and exceptional intelligence to achieve this goal. At the age of 15, Marguerite's parents blamed her for the accidental death of her 4-year-old brother, who was running with her in front of their modest home in a village near Bordeaux in southern France. This was her first crime. As punishment, her parents sent her to a convent school for unintentionally killing her brother, which only intensified her guilt. One of the main reasons for her placement in the convent school was the family's poverty. There, the young girl was subjected to relentless beatings and constant reprimands. However, she received a meager education, learning hymns and essential social skills. For years in the Catholic convent where she was atoning for the murder, she forced herself into prayer, worship, and seclusion within its walls, to the point that those around her believed she would remain a nun for life. At the age of 16, she left the convent for a holiday in her village, traveling with her family to Paris to stay at the home of a relative named Madame Langlois. There, she began to see life in a different light, free from guilt and isolation. The beauty of the young girl, fresh from the convent and still wearing her long braids, captivated Madame Langlois, who worked in the entertainment industry. Sedated by Paris's freedom, its games, its laughter, and its men, she never returned to her family home or the convent. Before her holiday at her relative's house ended, Marguerite became pregnant with her daughter, Raymond, by an Englishman she had fallen in love with. His name was André Montclair. He promised to marry her and sought his father's approval. His father was working as a diplomat in India, and they awaited his reply while living together in his French mother's house. However, his father objected to their marriage, wanting a better future for his son and requesting that he join him in India. The son defied his father's refusal, leaving their unborn child behind. She gave birth to her daughter and named her Raymonda. From that time on, she had never seen him, never met him, yet she knew he was one of the thousands of men killed in World War I. She struggled to find work. Being extremely poor, she sent her illegitimate daughter to live far away in her family's country home. She was determined to escape poverty and live the comfortable and refined life she loved and aspired to. In an era when courtesanship and prostitution were highly sought after in Paris, prostitution presented itself as the ideal path to the life she desired. Marguerite began working as an obscure streetwalker. She later progressed, attracting men with her singing performances in local bars. This caught the attention of Madame Denart, the owner of a high-class brothel, one that catered exclusively to the elite and wealthy, offering the finest and most beautiful girls. Madame Denart discovered Marguerite, taught her the art of courtesanship, and she flourished as a high-class courtesan. She realized that her beauty was her only means of remaining at the top, lest her value plummet and she find herself wandering the streets again, searching for a man to pay her a few francs or buy her a cheap bottle of wine. And so her name, as a respectable courtesan, she was sought after by the most famous, wealthiest, and most prestigious men. Then she married 2 men. The first was an older, wealthy wine merchant named André Miller. He didn't need his father's permission to marry her, and she was no longer the naive girl with the dreadlocks. He gave Marguerite his last name, Miller, even though they never married. Her second husband was Charles Laurent, a young, wealthy Air Force officer. During her marriages, she became known as Maggie Miller and rose to prominence in pre-World War I Parisian society. These marriages allowed her to enjoy a life of luxury and travel with one of her husbands throughout Europe. She even traveled with him to the East, where she experienced the world of the Orient for the first time as a tourist. She divorced both husbands, with whom she had lived a free-spirited lifestyle, and received a financial settlement from them. She understood how to make a living by seducing and flirting with the wealthy. She lived for many years as a prostitute, and over time she began seeking marriages that she could exploit and profit from. Her relationships, after her first romantic experience, took on a transactional character. She would only marry if the men had money. The compensation she received for her divorce helped her maintain her membership in the high society she inhabited after her marriage, where she absorbed its traditions, had she remained divorced. After her divorces from the 2 French men, Marguerite finally became an independent woman with the financial means to maintain her glamorous and luxurious lifestyle. At the age of 30, she owned a lavish apartment on Rue Henri Martin, remaining close to the neighborhoods where the wealthy resided. She acquired horses for walks every morning in the Bois de Boulogne, employed full-time servants, and owned 2 limousines. She frequently hosted parties at her residence for friends she had made during her marriages, spending lavishly and cultivating connections within French aristocratic society. She also engaged in extramarital affairs with wealthy men who did not bind her to marriage. She remained a familiar face at jewelry exhibitions, fashion shows, and horse races. She reunited with her daughter Raymond. She sent her to the best boarding school in the country so she could focus on her new life. The beginning of World War I. But then World War I began, and the Parisian nightlife and revelry came to a standstill. Many of her lovers left to join their military units, and other civilians volunteered for the war, including her driver. She was forced to drive herself. Her father died, and then her 2 brothers joined the army, only to be killed in the early battles of the war. Due to the economic downturn, she volunteered as a nurse in a military hospital, where she met prominent figures through her volunteer work. Among them was Prince Edward, the heir to the British throne and son of King George. A relationship developed between them that lasted throughout the war, but he was frequently on the battlefields and would send her letters and war mementos. In front of the outside world, Marguerite hid behind the facade of an ordinary, upper-class woman. However, she contracted a chest ailment, and doctors advised her to stay in a dry, sunny climate to recover. So, she traveled to Egypt, after crossing the sea, despite the Mediterranean being teeming with submarines, she continued her quest to find a new, wealthy husband. Seeking a more stable life away from the war, during her trip to Egypt in 1921, Marguerite met a young man named Prince Ali Kamel Fahmy Bey, an Egyptian aristocrat who had inherited a vast fortune from his father. Ali was quickly captivated by the French flirt and pursued her to Paris. She completely captivated him at a time when the phenomenon of taking European mistresses was widespread among prominent Egyptians. Before World War I, Paris was a popular destination for princes, the wealthy, and politicians of the East. France was the second major power alongside Britain in the division of the territories that had belonged to the Ottoman Empire, a dispute that later led to war with the Turks. France's cultural influence in many Eastern countries and its liberal values attracted many of these Eastern aristocrats, who preferred to spend their holidays there, enjoying their freedom away from their Eastern societies. Parisian entertainment venues like the Folies Bergère were a popular destination for tourists, and she met many of them. These connections encouraged her to travel to Egypt, where she stayed at the Shepherd and Semiramis hotels, near the pyramids, one of Egypt's most famous landmarks for Europeans. Marguerite chose to stay at this hotel, which was associated with the Egyptian elite, high-ranking officials, and the British occupation army officers frequented its halls and dance rooms, attracting prominent members of the foreign community residing in Egypt. The European community wielded significant political and economic influence, controlling key positions within the economic administration. Their numbers had grown considerably, and they resided in Egypt almost permanently. They practiced their Western customs and traditions, which clashed with the Eastern customs and traditions of the majority of the Egyptian people. Ali Bey, the Egyptian prince, did not marry an Eastern woman because he was known for his reputation as a man of pleasure who squandered his wealth on European women fleeing the World War. Maggie was astonished by the displays of wealth and luxury she witnessed in the Marble Palace, the most beautiful of Cairo's palaces, which he had built for himself. He spent nearly £1 million in Paris on pleasures and wine, imagine the value of that amount at the time, and bought Margaret jewelry worth approximately £250,000. Wealthy Easterners would contract with foreign women, covering their expenses, providing them with accommodation, a monthly salary, gifts, and taking them to parties. To achieve victory over the European man who occupies their land, humiliates them, and lords it over them by sexually subjugating his European women and extracting from them a confession that they are masters in bed. And Ali paid her a mistress's salary. The two married in a civil ceremony in 1922, and he insisted she convert from Christianity to Islam, even though he was not religious himself. Margaret initially refused to leave her faith because she had been raised in a convent. However, she eventually converted to Islam. She agreed for money, while he did not use his wealth for the cause of his people. She changed her name to a new Arabic name, Munira Hannah Miller. Thus, after years spent in a life of debauchery, the courtesan Margaret Miller transformed from the official mistress of Prince Ali Kamel Fahmy into his legal wife. She moved from the Semiramis Hotel to the Marble Palace, and a legendary wedding ceremony was held for her. He believed he had triumphed by acquiring a European woman and proudly received congratulations. But because of her different culture, she felt that he treated her more respectfully as a mistress to win her over, and not as a wife in the same way. She wasn't allowed to wear revealing clothes, even though she had appeared in evening wear in Paris and Cairo before their marriage. He became angry if she appeared in immodest clothing in front of the palace servants and the general public. He no longer went out with her as he had before their marriage, nor did he take her to parties, hotels, or dance halls, because it was unacceptable in the East for a husband to take his wife out for evening events. Her outings with him were limited to opera performances, where she sat behind a curtain so no one could see her, and she would watch the horse races with him from afar. Her social life shrank because he forbade her from meeting her male friends and allowed her to meet only a limited number of women whom she invited to the palace for tea. She knew that Eastern customs prohibited the mixing of the sexes, and among Muslims, it was forbidden and unacceptable for a single or married woman to mix with strange men. So she had to live alone in the palace for most of the day and night, while her husband, Ali, went out all day and night to work and socialize with his Egyptian friends, with whom she was not allowed to sit or go out. While he had the right to mingle with European women, she no longer had the right to leave the house without her husband's prior permission, nor did she have the right to appear unveiled in public. If she went out, she had to wear a hijab to cover her face, because it was considered unbecoming for a respectable woman to be unveiled. He issued orders so that his Eastern relatives wouldn't criticize his unconventional marriage, even though he continued to lead a double life. Egyptian women went out wearing the hijab in revolutionary demonstrations against the British occupation. Some women removed their hijabs when traveling to Europe, and some demand the removal of the hijab to liberate Egyptian women from Eastern men, including friends of Madame Fahmy, who was forbidden from going out freely. Britain considered the hijab a symbol of the primitive and backward Egyptian people, incapable of governing themselves. How could a woman demand freedom for her country before demanding her own? The unveiling of women became a means of liberation and independence, and the wives of leaders removed their hijabs. However, traditional Egyptian society considered this an attack on the modesty and honor of conservative Egyptian women, believing that abandoning the hijab turned them into agents of the foreign occupier. While they saw him as a foreign man, albeit a liberated one. Madame Fahmy was trying to break free from her husband, whom she believed was using the hijab as a means of controlling her. He placed guards and servants in the palace who ordered and monitored her, instead of her ordering and monitoring them. They eavesdropped on her phone calls and conversations with her guests at home. They monitored everything she did while her husband was away. The palace, which she had envisioned as a place of happiness and dancing, became a confined space, much like her life in a convent, a stark contrast to her previous life of freedom. Ali Bey tried to force his strong-willed wife to conform to the lifestyle, behavior, and traditions of Egypt. He treated her according to the Eastern perspective that believed a woman could only love a strong, controlling, and jealous man. But Madame Fami was stubborn. She had lived her entire life as a free woman and had been the dominant partner in every relationship she had with men, especially with Eastern men, over whom she felt a sense of racial superiority. She wanted both his money and her freedom, and she could never be the obedient, submissive, and humble Muslim wife that Ali had imagined. Yet she resisted every attempt he made to subjugate her as an Eastern man, just as Britain sought to subjugate the Egyptian people. Ali continued to challenge his wife, just as the Egyptian people continued to resist, Eastern and Western, each trying to subdue the other. He wanted her to become Munira Fahmy, but she remained Margaret Miller. She wanted him to become a liberated Western man, although he was Egyptian. He wanted her to become a conservative, Eastern woman, even though she was French. But she hoped that if they traveled to France, he would regain his liberated, European personality and return as a gentle, refined lover, not a violent, controlling husband who behaved differently in France. However, in Paris, he continued to refuse to release her from his control because she was his wife in both Egypt and Paris, not his lover in either country as she had been. Even though they returned to Paris to spend their nights in theaters and nightclubs, away from Egypt, he remained jealous. They would run into some of her former lovers on their outings, and he suspected every man she spoke to who wasn't already her ex-lover. He couldn't forgive her for her past, filled with lovers, even though he had competed with them for her affections. His Eastern upbringing made him suspicious of her, and her past a source of shame. She used her time in France to plan her next trip to London. She used her time in France as a pretext to plan her next trip to London. It was her only chance to see her illegitimate daughter, who was still attending a boarding school in the British capital. Because there were street robbers in Paris and London who preyed on women to steal their jewelry, the prince gifted her a small automatic pistol for self-defense should she be attacked. He also taught her how to use it. She traveled with her expensive jewelry, as it would have been inappropriate for her to appear with him without adorning herself with jewelry befitting her princely status. She carried the pistol in her handbag when she went out alone or kept it in her hotel room drawer. That evening, Madame Fahmy wore her jewelry and went with her husband to the play, The Merry Widow. However, after the play, the couple returned to the Savoy Hotel. Resentment grew in their room, accusations were exchanged, and the argument escalated, becoming increasingly violent. He told her that she was the one who should obey him, not the other way around, that she should integrate with him, not the other way around, that she should live like him, not the other way around, that she should eat and dress as he wished, that she should live in his country, not the other way around, that he should live with her in her country, France, and wear their clothes. He insisted that she return with him to Egypt and wear the hijab. But she refused, saying that freedom was more important than the hijab, that she was free in her body and mind, and that even if her body were enslaved, her free mind could not be. Her husband then struck her, but her anger intensified when he called her a European prostitute. She placed her fingers on his neck, but Ali threw her down. However, the matter ended brutally. Margaret shot and killed Ali Fahmy Bey with the pistol he had given her. At her trial, she defended herself by using letters Prince Edward had sent her during the war to blackmail the British royal family into not executing her. She promised to hand over the letters in exchange for her acquittal. The renowned English lawyer, Sir Edward Marshall Hall, defended her. The trial transformed from one of a woman who killed her husband into a defense of a civilized and liberated European woman who had been lured to Cairo to be imprisoned with other women and have her freedom taken away. The defense became not of her, but of the free Western civilization that believes in personal liberty and equality between men and women. Ultimately, Margaret was acquitted because it was considered self-defense by a European woman against her Eastern husband. However, the Egyptians believed that if the crime had occurred in Egypt, she would have been convicted and executed, and that she had lured him to her own country to kill him so she wouldn't have to face trial in an Egyptian court. Egyptians' admiration for the European justice system waned. The trial was deemed unfair, just as European courts are unfair to their own people, often acquitting Western murderers. Margaret became a symbol of the West, which they saw as occupying their land and killing their men. The marriage of an Eastern man to a Western woman, and even sleeping with her in the same bed, was considered an act of treason, with husbands being loyal to the nation to which their wives belonged. How could the European justice system defend women's freedom while failing to defend the freedom of entire nations? However, murder did not preclude inheritance. After her acquittal, Margaret returned to Paris, bearing her husband's name, Princess Margaret Fahmy, even though the union of East and West in one bed was considered impossible. She inherited from the man she had killed because he was her husband. The Egyptian justice system granted her his estate. She lived there for the rest of her life, having inherited her murdered husband's fortune against his family's wishes.